Continuing on from part 1, linked below. In part 1 we started looking at the category of positive time-bound commandments, such as the Tallit, from which women are considered exempt as a class. But does that system make sense? And why are women exempt? If women are exempt, do those reasons still make sense today? And is it possible for all genders to achieve equality of obligation and therefore equality of representation and participation? This is what we will address in this second and final part of this study session. So stay tuned and join me for some more learning. An important idea when you're studying Jewish texts is not only reading what the text does say, but also what it doesn't say. What this Talmudic text doesn't say is women are spiritually inferior. These are male garments that don't look good on women, or it doesn't feel appropriate. It doesn't say women can't handle the intellectual, spiritual, or religious rigor of being bound or exempt from these commandments. It doesn't say we don't like how a talit looks on a woman. None of these are considerations for the Talmud. Now, the Talmud is a sea of learning with a wide range of opinions and teachings and stories and legal rulings, and you can basically find everything in the Talmud, including statements about women that are hard for us to read as a 21st century audience. Statements that are very sexist, for instance. So I'm not saying that the Talmud doesn't talk about that. There are also statements in the Talmud that are extremely honoring of women, that lift women up and see women in their full humanity. Like any text in human civilization, it's a mixed bag. But in this case, we don't get any of those considerations. It is literally just a sorting out of commandment categories. Interesting, right? Especially when you hear contemporary resistance to women taking up these mitzvot. I will talk about that later. I'm going to bring very briefly a second Talmudic text. This one is again from the Babylonian Talmud, Menachot 43a. As the sages taught in a Baraita, all are obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzit, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, converts, women, and slaves. Rabbi Shimon states, women are exempt because this is a positive time-bound commandment, and women are exempt from all positive time-bound commandments. This exactly addresses what I was saying earlier about the social hierarchy of these different categories. This text reminds us, even though there might be a social hierarchy, and we can have all kinds of feelings about that, by the way, but let's accept that it's a descriptor of what society was at the time. All these different kinds of Jews, some who may have more power, others who may have less power, are all included in the mitzvah of tzitzit, despite their ranking, which counters the previous text about women being exempt. A minority opinion is stated by Rabbi Shimon that women are exempt, which destabilizes the system. Again, it doesn't really make sense. Why are women exempt? Our conundrum is getting more and more complicated. If women are exempt, does that mean that we are deprived of a spiritual opportunity to draw close to God and to earn merit for the fulfillment of the commandments? If tzitzit are about a radical message of equality and inclusion within the covenant, because all Israelites wear them, then what are we saying about Israelite women, Jewish women essentially, that they are not included? And if we value the wearing of a talit and we ascribe great meaning to the mitzvah, why would we want to shut people out from these mitzvot? Those are all questions that we should sit with as I read the next two texts. This one is from the Midrash, Tefillin 2:99. Rabbi Hezekiah also taught, when the children of Israel are wrapped in their prayer shawls, let them feel as though the glory of the divine presence were upon them. For Scripture does not say that you may look upon them, the fringes, but that you may look upon him. That means upon the Holy One, blessed be he. So this is an interpretation based on a close reading of the Hebrew text and the Hebrew word atah, which we find in the passage from the book of Numbers. I'm not going to go into that all that much. If you think about it, read the text, it makes sense. But the meaning that is derived from this text is very significant. That wearing a tallit is akin to drawing close to the divine. Would you want to shut people out from that experience? Why should women not be given the opportunity to experience that? If it's just a mitzvah from which women are exempt, sometimes certain categories of people can't do things. I am a green card holder. I can't vote in this country. Once I naturalize, I will be able to. That's a temporary state. But if we ascribe such meaning to it, then why shut women out? Let's go with the second text. This one is again from the Mishnah, Mishnah Makot 3:16. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha said, "The Holy One, blessed be he, wanted to grant merit to Israel. Therefore he gave them the Torah and mitzvot in abundance. As it is written, it pleased the Eternal for the sake of Israel's righteousness to magnify the Torah and make it glorious." So actually, this is not really about tzitzit specifically, but it's about a fundamental spiritual posture towards the mitzvot. If we are given mitzvot for the glorification of God as covenantal markers, and if the reasoning goes the more mitzvot the better, then should we women accept and settle for less? Well, that is also an interesting question. Are women not to be part of the glorification of God? Of course, a non-egalitarian response to that would be that women have other mitzvot and that this is actually a spiritual division of labor. I get the argument and I fundamentally disagree with that argument. As we dig deeper into these sources, I want to round out this video with a shift. The Mishnah, the Talmud, isn't really all that emotionally involved in this question. The Mishnah and the Talmud are just trying to figure out who does what. Later, we're going to see a shift to what we would call apologetics. Non-egalitarian apologetics for women being exempt from these commandments. Something that we didn't see before. The apologetics being, why are women exempt? Again, we can't find a reason in the classical sources, so later medieval, pre-modern, and modern Jewish thinkers and rabbis try to formulate arguments why women are exempt from the mitzvot. Trust me, I don't like any of them, because almost all of them are about sociology, not theology. Almost all of them are about the value we ascribe to women's participation or women's inclusion, and nothing else. It's about the projections of people onto the motivations of women, the projections of people onto the engagement of women and their participation. So let's take a look, shall we? So there are a variety of classical sources that struggle with the question of more mitzvot, more brownie points. Do you earn more privilege or earn more connection to the divine if you do mitzvot in which you have not been commanded to do? The breakdown is kind of as follows, roughly. Sephardi and Mizrahi authorities from Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, the Near East, and even the Far East, those Halakhic decisors tend to say, you want to do an extra mitzvah? Go for it. You're not obligated, but if you feel moved to do this extra mitzvah as a woman and you want to wear tzitzit, go for it. We like it. We approve. In the Ashkenazi world, for Jews of European descent, the argument is kind of the opposite. There is a reticence to encourage women to do extra mitzvot under the guise of this is yura'ah. Yura'ah is a rabbinic Hebrew word that means arrogance or pride. It is prideful for you to upend the natural order in which the Torah has designated us our tasks, and hence we are to discourage, if not outright prohibit, women from doing them, even though an exemption is not a prohibition. Let me repeat that. An exemption is not a prohibition. But this is where medieval and contemporary Halakhic decisors tend to lean towards. And this is what gets us in a pickle. This is the fundamental disagreement between many streams of orthodoxy and the non-orthodox world when it comes to issues of gender. One of the voices that uses this idea of arrogance and therefore discourages women from doing time-bound commandments is the Ramah. The Ramah was Rabbi Esther. He was the author who codified the Shulchan Aruch for an Ashkenazi audience. The Shulchan Aruch is a very famous medieval Sephardi legal code that became dominant throughout the Jewish world, and Rabbi Esther wrote a gloss or a commentary on it to make it applicable to Ashkenazi communities. See, I told you this would get technical. And the Ramah states that women are technically allowed to don a tallit, but it would appear to be an act of arrogance, yuhara, for women to perform this commandment. In contrast to Ashkenazi rabbis, there is an opinion by several Sephardi rabbis, Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Al-Ghazi and Rabbi Yom Tov ben Yisrael Al-Ghazi, who held that the observance of this mitzvah by women was not only permitted, but actually commendable, since such diligence among the non-obligated would inspire these women's male relatives to be even more diligent in their own observance. In other words, be a good example to the boys. It's not my preferred line of reasoning, to be honest, but it is a source that rabbis were not clear-cut on this. Sometimes you just gotta take the win. Now we're going to move into the modern era. The modern era gets really interesting because in the modern era, sociological factors become ever more pressing. Here is a voice from the modern Orthodox world. Rebbetzin Blue Greenberg, married to a phenomenal Rabbi Yitzhak Irving Greenberg, and Rebbetzin Greenberg is really a scholar in her own right. They are a magnificent team together. And she writes in a very famous, slightly older book, but definitely still worth the read, on women and Judaism. I highly recommend it. I will link it below. Does Halakhic stratification of the sexes explicitly serve a theological purpose, that is, relatedness to God? Must we say that God's eternal plan for the sexes was a hierarchy, one dominant and one subordinate sex as law and ritual define us? Could it be that God, who loves all of his creatures, prefers and esteems the devotion of one class more than the other? Or can we say perhaps that the inequity is reflective of an undisputed socio-religious stance of ancient times? So this is a modern Orthodox voice. This is not a reform or a conservative voice where, for those of us in the egalitarian world, we are more eager to let contemporary equity arguments shape our process of determining issues of Jewish law or Jewish practice. This is a voice from Orthodoxy. So that's very telling and very noteworthy. And then this text is actually too long to read, but I will link it down below. Should all Barbies wear Tefillin? I mean, you gotta pay attention with a text like that, right? Should all Barbies wear Tefillin? This is written by a friend of mine, Jen Taylor Friedman, one of the first Sofrot female Torah scribes in the world, and she is amazing. And she made something called Tefillin Barbie. I will insert a picture. Tefillin Barbie. I dressed up as Tefillin Barbie for Purim one year, as an aside, which started as a joke and it became an internet meme, and then it became a treasured heirloom for egalitarian women to purchase, and then it was even like taken up into a museum collection of a Jewish museum somewhere. Tefillin Barbie outgrew its intent of what started as a funky craft project. In any way, so she wrote this essay, which is really worthy to read. Should all Barbies wear Tefillin? I.e., should all women as a category in the modern world be obligated in the time-bound commandments? And her answer is, well, it depends. If you do not want to be obligated in the time-bound commandment, if you feel fulfillment in your gendered role, in your complementarian role in the Orthodox world, you do you. That's great. No one should be forced to observe a mitzvah from which they are exempt, because if they transgress the mitzvah, they bear the burden of that exemption. However, if you do adhere to a philosophy of egalitarianism and that believes that women as a class should be obligated, then you should behave as if you were obligated and practice these mitzvot. Now here's a really important caveat, and I will address kind of the psychological factors in another video: imposter syndrome, our uncertainty and insecurity, whether we feel worthy of performing this mitzvah. Just because you're obligated in the mitzvah doesn't mean you have to get it perfect all the time. For any mitzvah, not even Orthodox Judaism expects us to get it perfect all the time. That is why God, in God's mercy, gave us the mechanism of teshuvah, of repentance, of return, of repairing the human-divine relationship, or even the human-human relationship. You can consider yourself obligated and also not be consistent in your practice. I will talk more about this in another video, but that's a really important thing to take away psychologically as we internalize these exceptionally high bars of observance. Can I wear a tallit if I'm not obligated? Am I a failure if I don't pray every day or pray 3 times a day if I do choose to wear tefillin? These are very pressing questions for disenfranchised Jews who seek to enfranchise themselves in a spirit of equality when it comes to the mitzvah. And I want to say, first of all, it's between you and the Holy One. But second of all, take heart. None of us are perfect. None of us are fully observant at any point of time. And you could even argue, like maybe Reform philosophy would, is that really even necessary? Is that the metric that we want to go by? Maybe it's about the journey. Maybe it's about having these divine encounters, whether or not we are consistent in our practice. I think consistency can be very valuable and important, but I don't think consistency should become a constraint or a deterrent for us experimenting, feeling out, and growing in the mitzvot. God meets you where you are at. Having said that, if you do consider yourself obligated, as you do, even if you miss it, even if you get it wrong sometimes, even if you don't do it sometimes, even if you choose not to do it sometimes, that obligation stands. And in that case, those Barbies should be wearing a tallit or tefillin. The last text for my Reform friends out there is a very important text. And this was a text from many years ago. Reform Judaism has a very long track record of enfranchising women from its earliest days. That doesn't mean that Reform Judaism was always egalitarian. Reform Judaism went through its own process of fully enfranchising women in every aspect of Jewish life. But from its inception in the early 19th century, it was definitely on a trajectory to ascribe greater dignity and inclusion of female voices and female leadership in Jewish religious life. This culminated, of course, with the ordination of women as a class in the 1970s. And that is now a little over 50 years ago. Hashtag sacred calling. All my Reform colleagues will get exactly what I mean. Having said that, the first female ordained Reform rabbi was actually Regina Jonas, a German Berlin-based rabbi ordained in 1935. That is a whole different video. Be what may, as Reform Judaism has gone on a long march to include women fully in its ritual life, it also addressed the question of tzitzit. This was a response. So the law is clear enough. One authority believes that a woman is actually in duty bound to wear the fringes. All agree that she may wear them if she wishes to, except for the limitation that it might look like the pride of extra piety. Besides, In our reform movement, where special emphasis is placed upon the religious equality of men and women, there can be no real objection to young women putting on the tallit when they participate in the service. This was written by Solomon Freehoff, 1970, and later quoted in another document in 1983. So already the Wayback Machine takes us back to 1970, when egalitarian practice was not at all normative. And in 1970, rabbis in the reform movement were already encouraging young women to wear a tallit. We have come full circle, friends. This is a long video. I'm wondering whether I should put it in 2 videos, actually. There's a lot going on there. And I haven't even scratched the surface. The ocean of Jewish learning. Be what may, what are some of our takeaways? What's the nafka mina? The takeaway, as we would say in Aramaic. What do you pull out from this? What are our concluding thoughts? Our concluding thoughts is the tradition isn't clear. And that the only main arguments given against women wearing a tallit are emotional or sociological arguments. We have learned that the time-bound category is a little bit confusing and doesn't actually give us a reason from the sources why women are exempt. We have learned that many authorities actually think it's praiseworthy for the non-obligated to obligate themselves voluntarily. We have learned that the only arguable resistance to women performing time-bound commandments is emotional, psychological, sociological. Times change, mores change. Thank God. And we have learned that early Reform Judaism has been on board with this for a long time. All this to say is that I don't think there is any barrier from the Torah onwards to women and people of all genders to wear a tallit, any kind of tallit. And I want to give you a final thought, which also links in with something I discussed in a previous video. Is a tallit sacred garb, or is it a prayer item, or is it an identity marker? If you are going to gender a tallit, then you are pushing it in the category of sacred garb. But even in our contemporary world, there are gender-neutral garments, friends. Blue jeans, hoodies, sweaters, t-shirts, and this is entirely culturally specific. Jews in another part of the world made gender garments very differently than we do here in the West. I think it's much more about personal preference rather than ascribing gender roles to a rectangular piece of cloth with fringes on it. Don't overthink it, friends. So, all in all, I hope this is an encouragement from a female rabbi to all those people who may have heard once upon a time in their lives, or who are hearing right now, you can't do this. This is not for you. Exemption equals discouragement. Exemption equals taboo, shaming, policing, gatekeeping. Judaism is not about gatekeeping. It is about opening doors. And I want to open the door to this beautiful mitzvah to anyone who wants to practice it. More next time. Happy tallit wearing. I hope this is encouraging and life-affirming and joy-giving for you as you grow in mitzvah and experience and explore the rich spiritual offerings of our beautiful and inclusive tradition. As usual, leave your comments down below. Let me know how you feel, how you think. Share some of your negative experiences. Let's talk about it in the comments. Share some of your encouraging and positive experiences. Let's talk about it in the comments. And a big, great hug from me to you, people of all genders, my sisters, my siblings out there who want to practice this mitzvah. Thank you for joining me today. Like and subscribe. I put a lot of effort into this one. And I will see you in the next one, which will be a Q&A format about all the weird and wonderful stuff that can come up when you're thinking about the practicalities of wearing a tallit. Like, how do you wash the thing? Can I wear a tallit when I'm in the process of conversion but I haven't converted yet? What's our with the different tying styles of the fringes? What material does it need to be if I want to make my own? For all that, stay tuned in the next episode. Shalom uvracha, with peace and blessing from my bayit to your bayit.